Margaret was 68 years old, recently retired from 30 years of teaching second grade in a small town outside Knoxville, Tennessee. She was the kind of woman who kept a garden, wrote letters by hand, and made her own granola every Sunday morning. She told me she had switched to homemade granola 3 years earlier because her cardiologist had mentioned watching her cholesterol, and she wanted to do something proactive. She was proud of that granola. She used oats, dried cranberries, a drizzle of honey, and a handful of walnuts. She ate it with low-fat yogurt every single morning without exception. Margaret came to see me not for her heart. She came because her daughter had noticed something. Margaret was losing words mid-sentence. She would stop, look slightly to the side, and the word would just be gone. She had started writing grocery lists for stores she had been shopping at for 20 years. She laughed it off in my office, the way people do when something genuinely frightens them. She said, "I'm just getting older, Dr. Whitney. Isn't this just what happens?" I ran her blood work. Her fasting blood sugar was elevated, not diabetic range, but what we call pre-diabetic. Her insulin levels told a story that her annual physical had never flagged, because most annual physicals don't test insulin directly. They test glucose. And glucose, by the time it rises, is the last chapter of a story that started years earlier. The story started with Margaret's granola. I'm Whitney, and I've been practicing internal medicine with a focus on senior preventive health for over 2 decades. I want to tell you something right at the beginning of this video that I tell every patient who sits across from me for the first time. Your annual physical is not designed to catch what's quietly happening to your brain. It's designed to catch what's already gone wrong. There's a difference. And for the generation of adults between 60 and 80, that difference is everything. What I want to talk to you about today is something I have watched unfold in my practice more times than I can count. It involves sugar. But not the sugar you think, not the candy bowl, not the soda. The sugar hiding in foods that have been specifically marketed to your generation as healthy. Foods associated with heart health, digestive health, energy, and longevity. Foods that are sitting in your kitchen right now. Foods you may have eaten this morning. The connection between this hidden sugar and cognitive decline is one of the most important and least discussed topics in senior medicine. Some researchers have begun using the phrase type 3 diabetes informally to describe the relationship between insulin resistance and Alzheimer's disease. Your brain is not separate from your metabolic health. It never was. But for decades, we treated them as unrelated systems, and older adults paid the price for that assumption. Here is what I need you to hear clearly. Cognitive decline is not inevitable. Memory loss is not simply aging. The fatigue, the word-finding difficulty, the brain fog that so many of my patients chalk up to getting older, these things have mechanisms, and mechanisms can be interrupted. That is the entire reason I make these videos. What I'm going to walk you through today is 5 specific foods that most people over 60 are eating regularly in the genuine belief that they are doing something good for their bodies. I am going to explain exactly what these foods do inside your brain, what the research shows, and what you can replace them with starting tomorrow morning. No expensive supplements, no complicated protocols, real, accessible changes. But I want to start by asking you one thing before we go further. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. I mean it. I read these. Margaret, by the way, is doing significantly better. We made changes, real ones, and she told me at her last visit that her daughter stopped worrying. That is possible for you too. But first, you need to know what you're actually dealing with. And what I'm about to tell you, starting with the very first item on this list, is going to surprise you. Stay with me. Let's start with oatmeal. I know, I can already hear the pushback. Oatmeal is practically sacred in American health culture. It's on the heart healthy certification lists. It's what cardiologists recommend. It's what dietitians hand out in pamphlets. I have colleagues who eat it every single morning and tell their patients to do the same. And I am not here to tell you that oats are poison. I want to be very clear about that. What I am here to tell you is that the way most people over 60 are preparing and eating oatmeal is creating a blood sugar spike that their brain cannot afford. Here is the mechanism in plain language. Oats contain a fiber called beta-glucan, which is genuinely beneficial for cholesterol and gut health. That part of the story is real. But most people are not eating steel-cut oats cooked slowly at home with nothing added. They are eating instant oats, flavored packets, or quick oats that have been processed in a way that dramatically increases something called the glycemic index. The glycemic index is simply a measure of how fast a food raises your blood sugar. Instant oatmeal has a glycemic index comparable to white bread, and when blood sugar rises fast, insulin spikes to meet it. In a younger metabolism, this cycle recovers quickly. In a brain that is already navigating the insulin resistance that comes with aging, this spike, followed by crash pattern, is not benign. A study published in the journal Nutrients found that repeated postprandial glucose spikes, meaning blood sugar surges after meals, were independently associated with accelerated cognitive decline in older adults, even in individuals who were not diabetic. Even in people whose fasting glucose looked completely normal on their annual labs. This is the part most people never find out. You can have a normal fasting blood sugar and still be doing significant daily damage through the foods you eat at breakfast. I had a patient, a retired postal worker named Gerald from outside Savannah, Georgia, who was 64 years old and came to me convinced he had early dementia. His wife had come with him and she was scared. He was forgetting appointments, losing track of conversations, and sleeping badly despite being exhausted. His fasting glucose was 92, completely normal range. His doctor had cleared him, but when we looked at his diet, Gerald was eating a large bowl of instant maple and brown sugar oatmeal every morning, followed by orange juice, which I'll come back to. His post-meal glucose was telling a completely different story than his fasting number. We switched him to steel-cut oats, cooked with water, topped with a tablespoon of almond butter and a few blueberries. We removed the juice. Within 6 weeks, Gerald's wife sent me a message through the patient portal. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, "He's back." The fix is not eliminating oats. The fix is preparation method, added protein or fat to blunt the spike, and portion awareness. That is all. Now let me move to the second item, because this one affects nearly every person watching this video who believes they are doing something excellent for their health. I am talking about fruit juice. And yes, I mean the kind that says 100% juice on the label, the kind with no added sugar, the kind that feels virtuous. Here is the biological reality. When you eat a whole piece of fruit, the fiber inside that fruit acts as a buffer. It slows the release of the natural sugars into your bloodstream. The fruit juice has removed that fiber entirely. What remains is a concentrated delivery of fructose and glucose with nothing to slow it down. A standard 8-ounce glass of orange juice contains the sugar equivalent of eating 3 to 4 whole oranges without the fiber that would have protected you. The brain implications are significant. Research from the Framingham Heart Study, which followed thousands of adults over decades, found associations between higher sugary beverage consumption, including fruit juice, and reduced brain volume, specifically in areas associated with memory, reduced brain volume. In people drinking juice they believed was healthy. I want you to sit with that for a moment before we continue, because the next 3 items on this list get even more surprising. And one of them is something you have almost certainly been told, directly, by a medical professional, to eat more of. Tell me in the comments, are you a juice drinker? Type yes or no. I want to know. Let's talk about yogurt, because this one genuinely frustrates me as a physician. Low-fat yogurt became a cornerstone of the healthy aging conversation somewhere in the 1980s, and it never left. It is marketed specifically to women over 50. The packaging uses words like light, smooth, heart-healthy, and gut-friendly. It comes in flavors that sound innocent: strawberry, peach, vanilla bean, and I have watched patient after patient bring it up proudly during dietary reviews, the way Margaret did, as evidence that they are taking care of themselves. Here is what the food industry did when it removed the fat from yogurt. It made the product taste like nothing. Fat carries flavor. Fat creates satiety. Fat slows the absorption of sugar into your bloodstream. When manufacturers stripped the fat out, they had to replace what was lost with something, and that something was sugar. In many cases, a single 6-ounce container of low-fat flavored yogurt contains 22 to 26 grams of sugar. To put that in context, the American Heart Association recommends that women consume no more than 25 grams of added sugar in an entire day. You may be consuming nearly your full daily allotment in one breakfast item that you believe is a health food. The brain connection here runs through a pathway called neuroinflammation. Chronically elevated blood sugar triggers an inflammatory response throughout the body, and the brain is not protected from that inflammation. A 2017 analysis published in the journal Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience found that dietary patterns consistently high in added sugar were associated with increased markers of neuroinflammation and a higher incidence of mild cognitive impairment in adults over 60. Mild cognitive impairment is the stage that precedes Alzheimer's diagnosis in a significant number of cases. It is not nothing, and it is not inevitable. I had a patient named Carol, 66, a retired librarian from a small town in central Ohio. She came to me because she was tired all the time, and her mood had become unpredictable. She cried easily, felt anxious by mid-afternoon, and couldn't concentrate well enough to read, which was devastating to her because reading had been her entire life. Her doctor had attributed it to menopause-related hormonal shifts, even though Carol was well past menopause. When I looked at her diet, she was eating 2 low-fat flavored yogurts a day, one at breakfast and one as an afternoon snack, because she had read that the probiotics were good for her gut-brain connection. The concept was right. The product was working against her. We switched Carol to plain, full-fat Greek yogurt with no added flavoring. She added her own berries and a small drizzle of honey, which meant she controlled the sugar amount, and it was a fraction of what the flavored product contained. The fat in the full-fat version slowed her glucose absorption. The protein kept her full. Within a month, she told me the afternoon crashes had stopped. The fix is not giving up yogurt. The fix is reading the sugar line on the nutrition label and choosing full-fat, plain versions where you control what goes in. Now we move to item 4, and I want you to stay very close here because this one involves something that has been actively recommended to older adults for bone health, heart health, and general wellness. I am talking about flavored plant-based milks, oat milk in particular. Oat milk has had a remarkable ascent in the health food world over the past decade. It is positioned as the sophisticated, modern, better-for-you alternative to dairy, and for people with certain intolerances, it has genuine utility. But here is what the label does not emphasize. Oat milk, even the unsweetened variety, has a glycemic index between 60 and 70. The sweetened versions go higher. Oats, as I mentioned earlier, are starchy. When oats are processed into liquid form, the starches break down into sugars during manufacturing in a way that bypasses almost every protective buffer your body would normally have. A 2021 review examining the glycemic impact of plant-based milk alternatives found that oat milk produced significantly higher post-meal glucose responses than cow's milk, almond milk, or soy milk across multiple test populations. For a senior who is already navigating insulin sensitivity changes that come naturally with age, Starting the morning with oat milk in a smoothie or coffee is quietly working against brain health in a way that nothing on the packaging suggests. And now I need to tell you about item 5, because this is the one that stops people cold when I bring it up in my office. This is the item that has the strongest health halo of anything on this list. This is the one you were probably told to eat more of, possibly by name, possibly by a doctor, a nutritionist, or a well-meaning family member who read about it in a magazine. I am talking about whole grain bread, and what I am about to explain about what it does inside an aging brain is the part of this conversation that most people never reach. I need you to understand something about whole grain bread before I explain why it made this list, because I am not asking you to fear food. I am asking you to see it clearly. Whole grain bread is not the same thing as whole wheat bread, and neither of them is the same thing as what your grandmother baked. The breads lining the shelves of your grocery store, the ones with words like multigrain, hearty, ancient grain, and made with whole wheat printed across the front in earthy fonts, these products have been processed, sliced, packaged, and stabilized in ways that have fundamentally altered how your body handles them. A 2021 study published in Cell Metabolism followed adults eating what they considered healthy whole grain bread and found that individual blood sugar responses varied wildly, but that many participants experienced glucose spikes from whole grain commercial bread that were comparable to or higher than their responses to white bread. The fiber is present on the label. The fiber is not doing the protective work you think it is, because the grain itself has been milled finely enough that digestion moves faster than your insulin response can manage. For a brain over 60, this matters in a specific and serious way. The hippocampus, which is the region of your brain most responsible for forming new memories and for spatial navigation, has insulin receptors. Your brain uses insulin as a signaling molecule, not just your muscles and liver. When insulin resistance develops, and it develops quietly over years of these repeated glucose surges, the hippocampus begins to receive less of the fuel and signaling it needs. Research from the University of Washington has connected insulin resistance in the brain specifically to the kind of memory lapses my patients describe most. Tip of the tongue word loss, forgetting familiar roots, struggling to retain new information. These are not random. These are metabolic. Margaret's granola, Gerald's oatmeal, Carol's yogurt, the oat milk, the whole grain toast. None of these people thought they were doing anything wrong. Every single one of them was following advice they had been given in good faith. And that is exactly why I made this video. So let me give you something practical. Let me give you what I call the morning brain protocol, because breakfast is where most of this damage accumulates, and breakfast is where you have the most control. Step 1. Audit your breakfast for hidden sugar today, not next week. Turn over every product you eat in the morning and look at one line only: total sugars. If any single item exceeds 10 grams, it deserves a second look. Flavored yogurts, granolas, plant-based milks, juices, and flavored oatmeal packets are the most common offenders. You do not need to throw everything away. You need to see what you are actually consuming. Step 2. Add fat and protein to every morning meal. This is the single most effective way to blunt a glucose spike from any carbohydrate source. 2 eggs, a spoonful of almond or peanut butter, full-fat plain yogurt, a small handful of walnuts. Fat and protein slow gastric emptying, which means the sugar from whatever else you are eating enters your bloodstream more gradually. This is not complicated. It costs nothing extra. Step 3. Replace juice with whole fruit. 1 orange instead of a glass of orange juice. A small bowl of berries instead of a smoothie made with fruit juice as the base. The fiber stays intact. The sugar release slows. Your brain gets the antioxidants without the spike. Step 4. If you eat oats, choose steel cut only and cook them yourself. Add a protein source alongside them. Never eat oats alone, and never eat the instant flavored varieties. The processing difference between instant oats and steel-cut oats is not minor. It is the difference between a food that serves your brain and one that quietly works against it. Step 5. When you choose bread, look for breads where the first ingredient is a whole grain listed by name, and where the fiber content is at least 3 grams per slice. Sourdough made with whole grains has a lower glycemic response than most commercial whole wheat options because the fermentation process changes how the starch behaves. This is a meaningful distinction. Step 6. Talk to your doctor about testing fasting insulin alongside fasting glucose at your next visit. Not just glucose, insulin. Ask specifically. Most standard panels do not include it unless you request it. Elevated fasting insulin is an early warning that your body is working harder than it should to manage blood sugar, and catching it early is where the real intervention lives. Here's what I need you to hear as we close. You are not too old for this to matter. You are not too far down a path to change direction. The brain has a quality called neuroplasticity that does not expire at 60 or 70 or 80. The research on dietary intervention and cognitive outcomes in older adults is genuinely hopeful, and I want you to carry that with you. Margaret still makes granola on Sundays. It looks a little different now. She uses less honey, more nuts, full-fat yogurt on the side instead of low-fat. She told me recently that her daughter stopped asking if she was okay every time they talked on the phone. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this video reached you at the right moment, please share it with someone you love before their next appointment. A spouse, a sibling, a friend who prides themselves on eating healthy. The people most likely to need this information are the ones least likely to know they need it. Subscribe if you want to keep having these conversations because I am not finished. There is so much more your appointment didn't cover. I'm Whitney. Take good care of yourself. You deserve nothing less.